So this is what we're going to be working with today. You can see I've already been using away at this little iron bar. It's about a centimetre across the way, just square, what you call square stock. So that's what we're going to be making these little arrowheads from. Just put it down the anvil there. So what we're going to do is we're going to heat up the end section of this, about an inch and a half, and flatten it out, and that's going to be the socket of the arrowhead. And then we're going to cut the bar across around about there and forge out the pointy bit of the arrowhead and flatten it out and try and recreate one of these medieval arrowheads. See, the forge is just tipping away there, so we'll keep adding fuel to it, keep adding oxygen into it, and we'll come back when we're ready to heat up some metal. So now the iron bar is in the little forge. Just got it propped up. The reason why I've got it propped up is that I want to keep the iron about an inch and a half down into the coals. That seems to be the hottest spot of the forge. If you put the tip of the iron straight down into the coals itself, it gets too hot and will actually burn the metal and make it very fragile. And of course, if you have the iron sitting up at the top, it's not getting the heat that it requires. So I'm just going to add a little bit more. So we've added the iron into the fire. I've got it just propped up here on a piece of wood, and the reason why I've done that is just because I want the iron in a specific spot in the forge. I want it about an inch and a half down into that, because that's the hottest spot where all the heat is. Obviously, if you have it too high up in the cold, it's not going to get the required heat. That's going to soften the metal and make it pliable. But if you have it too far down into the bottom of the forge down here, it'll actually get too hot, and you can end up burning your metal and making it very fragile. So the iron's into the fire. I've added some more charcoal onto the top of it, and it's a case now of just getting the temperature up in the forge and heating up the top of that metal. So you see the flames coming now. So what we want to do is actually make the top inch and a half, 2 inches quite red hot, and we'll take it over to the anvil then, and we'll start hitting it with the hammer and trying to get it flattened out, and that's going to be the socket of our little arrowhead. Okay, so I'll get this iron up to temperature and then I'll come back to you. So we're just going to have a wee look at the temperature of the metal at the end. You can see the centre of that fire is very, very hot. It's a bit difficult because we're just out in the backyard here, and we're out in the daylight. So it's actually quite difficult to gauge the temperature of the end of the metal. It'd be a lot better if it was undercover and kind of in a dingy place like the shed in there. But we haven't got it sorted out yet, so we just have a wee look. And just hold against the dark, you can see that that's actually quite hot. You're looking for that kind of cherry red, sort of orange of a colour. So what I'm going to do is I'll take this over to the anvil over here, and I'll start hitting the end of it down with the hammer. neighbours must love me. So you can see we're starting to get somewhere now. We're flattening out the end of this bar. We're trying our best to keep it kind of central, so keep a line of symmetry going down, because it just makes it easier when you come to curl this into the socket. Interestingly, left on the anvil here you see all this. That's hammer scales. That's actually little bits of metal that have fallen off it as we've been napping, or not napping, forging. Interestingly, that's the stuff that you find in your soil samples whenever there's been a smithy around the place. Okay, so on an archaeological site, if you find plenty of this sort of stuff in your soil samples, it means there's been some metalwork going on. So we'll keep going with this. We'll flatten it out a wee bit more, and then we'll come back in the next video to actually curling this around into the socket. So very nearly there. That's the end of it flattened out. So you can see what I've gone for is kind of a cone sort of a shape at the end, and that's just going to help us when we go turn it around into the socket. You can see it's quite thin. It's hammered down to about a millimetre or 2 millimetres thick. So what we'll do is we will heat that up again, get it red hot, and we'll use the kind of the step, the neck and the anvil here, just to start working this around into the socket. So I'm just starting to round this off using the neck. When it's hot, I'm using a smaller hammer just because the metal's quite thin, and it's very easy to fragment at this stage. Yeah, so just keep heating it up and hitting it, and then heating up and shaping it and heating it up until we bend the two ends of it over to make the socket. But you can see where the shape of the socket is starting to come in. Okay. So now I've got the socket, the two ends of the little end piece of the iron bar closed over on itself. And use the help of a little iron spike there, just to keep the kind of circular shape of the socket and the cone shape. It's not perfect by all means, but it's purely illustrative. So what I need to do is work on this end of the socket here, just to close it up and isolate the shoulder of the arrowhead, and then we'll cut the bar and work on the point. Okay. So now we've got the socket closed up, so I am going to heat up the bar of the metal, and we'll use a chisel just stuck into the hardy hole here of the anvil, and hold it like that and hit it hard with a big hammer, and that is going to cut that end bit off, and the square bit will start working into the tip of the arrowhead. Okay, so that's the tip nearly separated from the iron stock there, and you really see how this thing is starting to shape up, and it's actually starting to look by way that it might actually turn out to be an arrowhead. So I'm just going to detach this little bit from the iron stock and then leave that to the side to cool, and I'm going to start working on the tip. So we're just gently putting a point onto the end of this little arrowhead here. So the socket is here, this is where the shaft would have been, and that's the business end there. So we're just going to continue to put a point on this, make it sharp, and then we'll start broadening out the body here. What we're probably going to make is what was called a Bodkin arrowhead, and these things were primarily for going through chainmail. So they had a long kind of pointy end and quite a stout body of the arrowhead itself. So it's probably the easiest one to make. It means you don't have to work too much on the main body here to flatten it out. And then just straighten everything up, tidy everything up, and away we go. Okay. So we're just nearing the end of making our arrowhead here. So we're just going to do the final quench. Quenching is when you bring the iron up to a high temperature and then you plunge it into something cold and wet like oil. In this case I'm using water because I don't have any oil. This will make the iron hard. It's more to do when you're making knives. You know, you want the knife to hold a hard edge and a sharp edge. Not so much important in arrowheads because usually they're being fired at something soft. Okay, so iron's up to temperature here. Little arrowhead. I finished putting the point on it, as you can see. So we go across the water. Right. So wherever we have it there. Let's see, is it cold enough to touch yet? Yeah, cold enough to touch. So there's our little medieval arrowhead. You can see the way it's a bit bumpy there. I've actually burnt the metal, and it's a hazard when the metal gets so thin because the little furnace gets so hot. I've actually burnt it. But you see, we've drawn it out a wee bit. It's got a nice little point on it. So that will be off now to the grinder to make everything nice and shiny and nice and sharp. But hopefully you've enjoyed the process of making an arrowhead. All in all, that's taken around about 45-50 minutes to make, but I'm taking things very slow. As I say before, I'm only beginning, but an accomplished blacksmith I'm sure could knock dozens of these out in no time at all. So there you go. All the best, everybody.